What do you think makes a great character? It could be a lot of things, some of which are intentional or implied through their actions. Complex emotions, or their rise to notoriety only to be squashed by their own hubris later down the line. Otherwise known as the Icarus, what did I just say on the flight here? Concocting such figures takes ingenuity, writing, and a tiny bit of luck. One of the best ways to grab an audience's attention to a character you pluck straight into your story is how they're revealed. Character introductions are the first indicator of whether or not you'll love this dramatis personae, or how they will affect the world. In manga especially, since it is driven by visual storytelling, the advantage lies in not needing much descriptive text to picture the character. And one manga in particular that is a pioneer in stellar character introduction is Dragon Ball. Haha, you thought wrong! But no, One Piece comes second. And one of the best character introductions in One Piece actually involves two larger-than-life figures appearing simultaneously and becoming some of the most important and standout individuals in the entirety of the series' history. Don Quixote Doflamingo and Bartholomew Kuma. You might be asking yourself, why do these two have the distinction of being one of the best introductions in One Piece? And yeah, you're not wrong. Compared to the introductions of characters like Blackbeard, Big Mom, Kaido, Emu, and recently Loki, Dofi and Kuma would look like ants to them. Heck, in the same chapter, you had freaking Whitebeard appeared. So why focus on these two besides the obvious memes that have manifested from their animated walk cycle? Now, I think it's personally due to how incredibly interesting they are at the start, to what they become at their preeminent section. That's what I want to explore today, and why these two ruthless warlords have changed the course of the series for the better, and what makes them important to our collective understanding of One Piece's world. One man who desires to destroy the world, and the other who wants to save it.
そもそもグランドラインが海賊の墓場と呼ばれている理由は君臨する三大勢力のせいなんです。その三大勢力の一つが桜花七部会。
The Seven Warlords have been a mainstay ever since the beginning of Arlong Park, some 26 years ago if you're keeping track like a dork. Like me. However, they were effectively presented as One Piece's version of privateering. Although these privateers are somewhat different from our real-world counterparts. They possess magical powers such as sand manipulation, shadow arts, or just being clown. They were a powerful factor in controlling the unpredictable pirate era, up until their dissolution in the crux of the Wano arc. While Dracula Mihawk was the first warlord we were introduced to performing his duties as a warlord of the sea, along with Jean making a passing mention as well, we only got to see what they truly were with Sir Crocodile, what you get if Captain Hook were born and raised in Chicago. He exemplified the double-crossed nature of a pirate under government contract. His pursuit of starting a coup d'etat within the Kingdom of Alabasta for his ambitions proves his underhandedness outright, yet pile that on with leading an underground criminal empire, and a diabolical streak of dirty murders and meticulous criminal actions, he was Exhibit A on why this system was very much fucked from the start. It allows unchecked power to pirates to do anything besides opposing government operations, while causing utter harm that consumes not just lower-tier criminals, but the public in general. Heck, even when they do actions that target folks apart from the world government, they wouldn't face immediate justice unless it was already sent out to the public. Aside from Crocodile, Moria picked on any who crossed his neck of the sea, including Marines, by taking their shadows for his nefarious purposes. Hancock ransacked vessels of various allegiances while playing them off as accidents or provoked aggression. Bucky had an entire pirate contracting business that would have broken several laws concerning his warlord status. And, Doflamingo. Oh god, we'll get to him. Needless to say, the warlords of the sea were, beyond a reasonable doubt, scumbags.
耳を澄ませばアラバスタのうなり声が聞こえてきそうだ。そしてみんなこう思ってる。アラバスタを守るんだ。アラバスタを守るんだ。アラバスタを守る。 国を思う気持ちが国を滅ぼすんだ。
But, I mean, that's what pirates are by nature. Smoker was accurate in saying that no matter what you give a pirate, they will always be more interested in their own pursuits. Once a pirate, always a pirate. So the audience would have been given a pretty simple summation that the Warlords are terrible individuals who only sail these seas unchecked because of their usefulness in reducing the pirate population. However, much like what I discussed in my previous videos about pirates, it's a lot more complicated, and we would have to be aware of what actions brought these people to become just like this. Like Mihawk, the strongest swordsman in the world. A strange case of someone of his caliber joining the Marines despite his past misdeeds in targeting said Marines. He just so easily can slip into the background rather than stand out, a maneuver he also made when Buggy became the figurehead of Cross Guild. Hancock is another complex character, as her warlord status was vital for keeping her citizens safe from the outside world. She has every reason to hate the government due to her time as an abused slave to the world nobles, and has legitimate quarrels with letting herself be vulnerable to anyone again. And finally, you had the first son of the sea, Jinbei, who had a mission to foster better relations with humans despite the checkered past in order to fulfill long-term goals of both reconciliation and reparations for the nobles hunting them. It was only broken when Jinbei's pride couldn't allow for such reckless provocations between the Navy and Whitebeard.
わしの力は十分知っとろうが、この身を削って時間稼ぎになるなら結構、もとより命などくれてやる腹じゃい。
Every warlord, much like most of the characters in Ichiro Oda's world, has much more depth than when initially introduced, which is why I find Doflamingo and Kuma to be so fascinating, as they seem to enact cruelty on fairly different spectrums. When Doflamingo gets invited along with Kuma to a function looking to replace a vacancy in the warlord bracket, his first action as a character is to puppeteer two vice admirals to kill each other to cure his boredom. He shows very little remorse for the value of human life, and shows no hesitation in acting cruelly to those he looks down upon. Take Bellamy as a good example, as Dovi would personally go out to the island of Jaya to maim and disrespect the pirates with very savage affliction. Oh, and he's also a slave trader.
おめえな、人身売買なんてもう古いんだよ。バカ。時代はスマイルさ、スマイル。
The guy, when you look at him based on his finesse, is a total loose cannon. Kuma seems to be the complete opposite. Not much is said from him, but considering his unsympathetic rhetoric to the situation that was happening at the council meeting, and the delivery of his first line in the manga, his reservation seemingly hides a darkness. A simple, directional, and cold individual who is the only warlord who follows the government's orders without protest, something many of the others find to be unbecoming of a pirate. Yet he gets the job done on numerous occasions, being unflinched in his fight against an exhausted Straw Hat crew on Thriller Bark. He disrespects Frankie with an air cannon from his paw pads in response to his classless insult. This is One Piece, don't forget that. Blows up the island with an air bomb to annihilate them, made Zoro take in all of his captain's pain in exchange for his life, and on Sabayori is the person responsible for the Straw Hat crew's first major defeat. He is the One Piece world's equivalent to the Terminator, and that's because he is. A cyborg beyond human comprehension whose effectiveness is so great, it's just downright icy. No compassion, no mercy. That's what Kuma seemed to be all about, and his villain performance made him a menace near the end of the first part of the series. However, knowing what we know now about both these characters, we can see two sides of the same coin, in more ways than one. It's a duality of two men drafted into the warlord status, yet who share opposite views on the fate of mankind and their faith in a higher power. Though for Doflamingo, we couldn't fathom the depths that his faith goes down. And let me tell you, His previous crimes are just minor misdemeanors compared to what lies below that hole in his heart.
おいトロお前なんでドフラミンゴ
図に乗りすぎだ。
Whenever I have to ponder on the manic delusions of Doflamingo's fearless agenda to chaotically destroy what is once his by birthright, I then get this scene popping in my head, with his subordinate, Monet. Near the end of the Punk Hazard arc, Monet is about to hit the island's self-destruct switch, but bids Dofi farewell as she is about to do the deed. And how does Dofi respond to such loyal dedication? A request that she die for it, in order to kill herself for him. And she does it because she is a servant to his ambitions. How we can understand Doflamingo's inhumanity would be in how his followers dedicate themselves to him. Dofi, on numerous occasions, would defend his crewmates whenever someone made fun of them. The reason is that they are like a family to him.
幹部以上のメンバーは長く苦楽を共にした俺の家族だ。俺にはこいつらしかいない。家族を笑う者は俺が許さん。いいな。
Even in the face of defeat, most of the Doflamingo crime family would think in recompense on how sorry they are in not meeting Dofi's expectations, like with Lao Ji and Senor Pink. In fact, the nickname of Dofi is only said by members of the Don Quixote crew, which includes Viola, who, for a time, had a thing with Doflamingo. And it was probably non-consensual. Yeah, gotta nip this prologue in the bud. Doflamingo is a monster. For all the posturing and familial values he spouts on his crew, it holds no weight when you factor in his unyielding lack of compassion for common folk, the unyoung, and children. The family he built throughout his criminal career was a facade that acquired folks of different backgrounds and abilities to hoard wealth and gain influence.
あいつにとっては己の野心のみが全て。お前らのことなんざなんとも思っちゃいねえよ。
This can be seen with the tragic character of Baby 5. Without a name to call her own, she was psychologically wired to be of service to those who needed it. This is because of her birth mother calling her useless, as she is left abandoned to fend for herself. Needless to say, she needs validation for her existence, an exploit Dofi would use to control her for any nefarious directive. Many of the older members understood this, such as Lao Ji, who had this to say.
ベビー5は我々のものだ。必要とされるだけで命をも捨てる。こんな便利な女が他におるか？
便利
This is why, when Trafalgar Law joined him for a brief time in the past, it was only because of a need to gain immortality from a devil fruit that would cost its user their life. And conveniently enough, Law was so traumatized by the world's heartlessness during the Flavance massacre that he would have done so. But Rocinante, Doflamingo's biological brother, foiled his scheme. And that was something unacceptable to him.
破壊の申し子のようなお前から得るものは何もない。もうほっといてやれ。あいつは自由だ。
A common thing Doflamingo loves to monologue tons of times over is nihilistic views on the world itself. How it would just be better for everyone if it just burned down. It's kind of like listening to that one kid in your classroom who has a rich family, and because they didn't give him that one fancy PS5 for Christmas, he starts to write dark manifestos and rave about how unfair life is to him. Yeah, that's Doflamingo incarnate.
おいなぜひれ伏さねえ貴様ら無礼だぞ俺の前を横切ったな誰かピストルを持て
Starting on top of the world, Doflamingo began life as a celestial dragon, the most privileged group of folks imaginable. With little to no regulations, they are free to do whatever their selfish whims desire, owning slaves, stealing lands unaffiliated with their government, and so much more that I would probably get demonetized for. Doflamingo had this mindset from a young age, and was unapologetic in ever looking past superficial displays of opulence. So when the time came that he and his family would migrate from their holy land to live with the regular folk, Doflamingo began to feel cheated out of his rightful place. Of course, the decision to leave the Holy Land was a foolish attempt to grow closer with the lower class, as the family was pursued for days on end by angry, vengeful townsfolk who had experienced the cruelties from celestial dragons in the past. From his mother dying to becoming lynched by his pursuers, Doflamingo's rage grew to its apex, drawing himself further into his dark side and becoming the savage he is today.
何をされても生き延びてお前らを一人残らず殺しに行くからな!
The quote-unquote found family he acquired were only ever in it for the chance to escape life from the squalor, and his resentment to humanely good exhibitions of empathy can be best exemplified in his killing of both his father and brother by a pistol, a weapon commonly used by world nobles whenever they feel threatened or chastised. For Doflamingo, the gun and his devil fruit power to manipulate strings to control people are emblematic of his character. He also has this subtle habit of making sure he's always above someone, whether it's tying strings to the clouds to fly over top people's heads, or by standing on piles of bodies. His egotism drives much of his devastation, leading to the conquest of his birthright land of Dressrosa while using the citizens' loyalties however he saw fit. The country would become his servants, whether by choice or by any means necessary. That includes turning them into toys and controlling them to work till they break under the capital for his underground purposes. Yet, for every crown he wears, every deal he makes, every significant soldier under his heel, he will still never attain his status again. He is a boy who never escaped the darkness, and will drag those around him down to it to feel validated.
血を恨め。お前たちは操られるだけのゴミとして生まれたんだ。お前ら人間と俺とは違う。
By all metrics, he makes for one of the most evil characters in the One Piece world. And even with his fall from grace at the hands of a certain rubber boy, putting him back down to the deep recesses of his underworld, he still wears a dogmatic smile and grins at the looming tides that would envelop the pirate world.
今はどうだ。膨れ上がった海賊たちの数に対してガラ空きの椅子が一つ。始まるんだよ。海賊の歴史上最大の覇権争いが。
Yet, unbeknownst to a very young Doflamingo living a pampered life full of bounty and excess, was a larger figure who strolled in chains, yearning to be free. Now, who'd have thought that the man best known for having a big upper body and chicken legs could bring you to tears in a matter of watching his origin episodes?
Where are you? I'm in a glass case of emotion!
Sure, if you're talking to pre-time skip me, Kuma was seen as just a walking Arnold Schwarzenegger plot device added in to push the main characters to be better. A giant wall of cold steel that outclassed our crew in every way and held no empathy for their separation. He was described by many of the same caliber as a tyrant of a kingdom in the south. His atrocities committed were too brutal to even speak aloud. So terrifying, in fact, that it would seem rather counterintuitive to hear statements from others denying it. Now, what gives? Why the secrecy? And why the merciful actions towards our protagonists? He saved them from a no-escape scenario on Sabayori Archipelago, and then defended their ship for 2 straight years. He was a former commander of a faction of freedom fighters looking to dismantle the world government regime. And unfortunately for the man, as Doflamingo put it, Kuma was no more, and has instead become a walking superweapon with no memories to speak of. He has become an unfeeling robot, placed into the hands of the celestial dragons as their invincible slave, whom they can beat on and abuse without retaliation. We wouldn't learn much about Kuma for quite a while, until we get to Egghead, and finally meet Bonnie the pirate. And it's her desperate action from a walking pacifista that would spark our discovery of this so-called tyrant's past.
やだ助けて誰が踊りたくない
Compared to us learning more about the character depth of Dofi's depraved nature, we become a captive audience to the background of Bartholomew Kuma's struggle to save people. His family was enslaved to the Celestial Dragons, all because of a bloodline that the higher class said was meant to serve them indefinitely. His mother was worked to death, while his father was shot dead in the square for simply making noise. The young Kuma was then deemed a problematic slave, and made a human target in a disgusting hunting competition held by the dragons. It was only through the fate of meeting the eccentric Ivankov and a little girl named Ginny that he had the chance to change his fate. Unlike with Doflamingo, attaining the means of power to achieve his selfish inclinations, Kuma grasped his abilities and put his life on the line to make sure many innocents got off the island they were on.
生まれた時から偉いなんておかしいよ。生まれた時から奴隷なんて生まれる意味がない。何かの力がついたのならこんなかわいそうな人たちを一人でも多く救いたい。
Kuma has this innate uniqueness to him, where he feels the need to put his body on the line as a way to protect those who can't. And despite the horrors he had witnessed, some of which he could easily lash out at and go down the same path as Doflamingo, he chooses to live in veneration. His self-sacrificing compassion puts him in harm's way, even taking in the elderly's pain every Sunday at his church to give folks small relief in such dire times. Yet, because he puts himself on the line, he will usually forget that he's not alone in his duty, which is why folks like Ginny and the folks who come to his church every day are willing to help him in tasks he can't do by himself. And in recompense, he will fight for their safety, as he does with overthrowing the corrupt King Bakori from doing apartheid. Much of this would further push him into the role of an irregular, a person bouncing from one revolution to another to free those from similar injustice. But just like his nature, he would have to give it all up for the sake of another, like when his sweetheart Ginny died from complications of the disease and was left a child named Bonnie. Kuma wasn't just a father, he was the father who stepped up. He holds no value for his life, which in and of itself is maybe the most depressing of all. He lives in a world that he wants to love and yet it won't reciprocate it. Like when Ginny asks for his hand in marriage, he declines it due to how his mom was imprisoned just like him despite having no Buccaneer blood. He suppresses what hurts him the most, takes in others' pain despite his own, and at the prospect of becoming a government drone to save his daughter's life from the same disease that claimed her mother, he sacrifices his humanity.
俺はてっきり無理難題でボニーの命を救えなくなるんじゃないかと気が気じゃなかった。ボニーの病気が治るなら俺はどんな運命でも受け入れる。
Kuma lives in the shadow of so-called messianic figures who claim to be God's chosen despite their blindness to the suffering they cause. Even to his inevitable system shutdown, he was still lingering on how much trouble he caused so many folks in his lifespan, how he couldn't save more despite rescuing 500 souls from becoming playthings to the dragons. It's a trait a lot of us want to follow in, and it's such a tragedy to see this giant with a heart as big as the ocean become an unfeeling mechanical weapon.
迷惑生きるとは確かにそうじゃ。お前を愛した人間の数だけお前の死は迷惑である。
However, there is one lingering distinction I haven't briefed upon, and it is something relevant and intrinsic to these polar opposite men, that being their faith in the Nika.
太陽の神ニカ。
The Celestial Dragons all fear individuals with the initial D in their name. Funny to say that my middle name is also D, but it stands for Daniel, so not as cool. They are referred to as a moniker of the enemy, most likely because of their involvement in a calamitous event that was erased from history, otherwise known as the Void Century. There have been tons of characters given this middle name throughout the series, and it causes a lot of disturbance within the aristocratic system. This could be because many of the characters seem to defy the very rule of law in the world. They are always seemingly in battle with fate, pressured on by forces who wish to control and manipulate them, such as Saul's attempt to stop the Buster Call of O'Hara, or Porcus the Rouge hiding her pregnancy from the Marines in one of the most insane acts of love imaginable. It's most certainly an act of revolt against the proposed natural order that gets people like Doflamingo fuming with rage, like when Law tells Doflamingo of the D in his middle name. He violently assaults him. And when Cobra reveals his middle name to the true ruler of the world, Emu, he's assassinated on the spot. However, the D clan can be easily scrubbed away through many methods. The Nika part of that equation seems to throw everything out of whack. Nika is freedom incarnate, a person who can do whatever his heart wants without limits and restrictions. Kind of like a cartoon character, which One Piece is in its identity. Which is why Luffy is such a dangerous double whammy. Doflamingo wants to be seen on top of others, and he tries to steer Luffy to play his games during the Dressrosa arc. He strings him along to the Colosseum with a carrot on the stick being Ace's Flame fruit, and later pushes him to bursts of anger by using Bellamy as a pawn. However, this is when the nature of his devil fruit comes in. As while the powers of Nika aren't apparent, the rubbery properties and rejection of realism wear down this dripped out heavenly demon. Doflamingo has thought of the world as being predictable and bleak, and that the common folk are only followers of higher powers, in whom he and others would happily control. But for Luffy, it makes him want to vomit.
お前は何でもかんでも手の中に閉じ込めてどいつもこいつも操ろうとするから俺は息が詰まりそうだ!
Much of One Piece's themes and lessons surround our collective strive to fight back against oppression and authoritarianism. We can see that in our own reality with many brave and disruptive protests against the likes of public services being cut for vulnerable folks, outright rejection of police states, and the ongoing fight against an apartheid ethno-state and Holocaust by Israel against Palestinians. If Dofi Boy ever existed, it wouldn't be too unrealistic to imagine what side he would be on. Yet, where one looks to squander hope for a better tomorrow, Kuma dreams of this loving compassion for the human spirit.
私は子供の頃から自由になれず苦しんでいる人たちを救えるヒーローになりたかった。解放の戦士ニカのように。
The Nika dance was passed down from his father to him, a joyful dance done in the presence of children to evoke a sense of love and innocence, being silly and vulnerable to the people in your life you care for. While Kuma can't feel the joy of seeing Nika for the first time, his daughter can. Bonnie is the soul of Kuma, whom she looks up to, even changing her form to that of a buccaneer because of who she thinks makes a strong person, her father. Her age fruit makes her appear to be someone she is not, but that one day she can be, and who constantly gets squashed by the brutal totality and darkness of the real world. It's why her powers wouldn't work against Saint Saturn, and why she almost let herself be consumed by the hopelessness of life. Until Kuma, a father and a saint to the concept of freedom, rejects his programming, protects his daughter, and throws the most satisfying punch in the manga's history to date. No matter what the world might become, turning our backs and giving into nihilism is something I'm growing to deeply hate. I mean, I'm getting sick of hearing from folks just giving up on trying to change our world. I want to dream of a better future for many of my friends and family, but to achieve that, it requires effort. So when Bonnie sees her childhood hero for the first time, her sense of existence is restored. And that means she can draw on the creativeness that youth provides to push back the ugly pessimism that seeks to bind it down. Kuma does something that Doflamingo couldn't with his family, and that is to build his adoptive children to be independent and good-willed, not subservient or loyal to his methodology, to be loving and kind to the unfortunate, while taking a stand against those more privileged and uncaring. The power of Nika isn't just some wacky invention penned by Oda as a way to make his main character, say, manifest a baseball bat to strike multiple projectiles at a Spider-Man back at him with a blast of a nuclear bomb, although it looks pretty funny. Is to be a payoff to much of the build-up planted in by the author's uncontested writing to warrant deeper reflections of the very human traits of freedom, something that Doflamingo and Kuma both play in this wacky pirate tale. So now, when we go back to the introductions of this guy wearing a flamingo suit waddling across with a big bear tailing him from behind, we see a lot of the subtle nuance from their complexions. They both hold similar titles, they both have devil fruit powers, and they both hide a deep secret no one wants to know about. Yet, this is where they diverge and become different reactions to the main themes of One Piece. Dofi is darkness, and Kuma is light. Dofi wants to invoke chaos, while Kuma quells it. Dofi wants to be a king, while Kuma doesn't care for the title. Dofi doesn't want freedom from reality, whereas Kuma seeks to alter that reality to allow for liberation. These two characters have affected the One Piece story in more ways than one, making us cheer and cry for different reasons while still providing some of the best moments in the series' history. It's an apt comparison to make, but with deeper understanding of how much Luffy will affect the world as we know it, it's only fair to look at these two men's reaction when the end of this magnificent story shifts the world we know for the betterment of mankind. Thanks so much for watching this video, and tell me your thoughts about the characters of Kuma and Doflamingo down below. Like, comment, and subscribe if you like my content, and also be sure to subscribe to my Patreon if you'd like to see future videos come in days earlier before they're released on YouTube. It's your bra man, cooking up a killer pizza and doing a little dance on the side.